Welcome to the Business Performance Podcast, where we feature expert thought leaders and cover their best strategies, stories, and advice that you can use to successfully mature your own business performance. Now, here is your host, business coach, Henry Schneider. Hello, everyone. This is Henry Schneider with the Business Performance Podcast, and today it's my pleasure to talk with Jawad Shaikh of Avelead, which is a company that helps improve the revenue cycle in healthcare. And Avelead has been around for about 5 years now, but for the past 3 years, I've experienced phenomenal growth. And they've been on the Inc. 5000 list both in 2018 and 2019, and they're one of the top 10 development companies in Georgia and the top 10 companies in Atlanta. So, Jawad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so to begin with, would you please just briefly give us a description of Avelead, the types of customers you work with, and the types of things that you provide to them?
Sure. So Avelead is a revenue cycle automation company for hospitals and healthcare systems. We help them look at their business processes specifically around revenue cycle billing, patient financials, and help them put efficiencies in place by using our technology and tools and automate things as much as possible. And ideally just helping them identify missing revenue and making sure that their billing processes are accurate before an even bill is dropped through the door.
Okay. So what's the importance of quality to you when you're doing this?
Yep. Now, it really kind of starts with our clients, right? It's basically, that's our bread and butter of our business. And it is kind of twofold. We want to increase our clients' quality, and that's where we kind of start with. Obviously, if you have any familiarity with the healthcare world or even the healthcare revenue cycle world, you know how complicated it can be with government regulations, Medicare, insurance companies, claims processing. Even as a patient, you're used to receiving so many different bills and things like that, and you know how complicated it can be. So, increasing that quality of clarifying what is being clinically performed and matching to what's being charged for is kind of what we focus on, and getting that quality right is kind of key for our clients. So that's what we focus on.
All right. So what are some of the major problems you run into when you're trying to make certain that all those pieces connect properly?
Yep. It's kind of it's like keeping people in their silos and keeping people out of their silos. So one of the challenges we'll see is clinicians, physicians, nurses, those care providers. They're focused on providing the care, and this is what I've got to do to make sure that the proper procedures, the proper documentation in place. Whereas the financial side is focused on making sure the bills are right. So they need to stay focused on what they're doing, but obviously there's key independencies between the two of them, right? It's making sure what I'm doing on the clinical side matches, and there's impact to that, especially in today's world of electronic medical records, clinically driven revenue cycle. It's just making sure how what one is doing impacts the other is probably the biggest challenge.
So when I'm also thinking about in terms of, I guess the pricing schedule varies depending upon what insurance you have as well, right?
Right. And then if you're familiar with a charge master in the hospital, everybody starts with a charge master, and then you kind of get into, they have different pre-negotiated contracts with all these insurance companies or requirements for Medicare. So it varies by provider and by payer as well too. So you have to keep that in mind.
So how do you keep up the current with that information? Because that seems to change at least annually, if not more frequently.
Right. And I think that's where the beauty of our kind of tools comes in, right? Historically, a lot of that has been kind of manual, right? You have to make annual updates to your systems. If you're familiar with ICD-9 and ICD-10, all these codings that are updated, prices that are kind of updated, that's what we kind of looked at and saw what was happening manually, and then being able to pull data from all these different sources, whether it's government, whether it's payers, whether it's internally, doing the checks and then kind of doing automated updates and then reconciliation. So you can focus really just on the gaps or the discrepancies versus, everybody looking at everything every year.
Okay. So even with the codes, I know sometimes going to the doctor, they say, well, we've had experience if we report with this code that they're not going to pay. So if we use other code, they will pay. So you have to how do you handle that type of situation?
Sure, and this is where predictive analytics and some of our tools kind of come in, where they can basically say, typically, I'll just use a simple example that if you're having a surgery done, I'll have a surgery charge, and then usually, almost every time you have a surgery, you want to have anesthesia as well too, right? So you want to make sure you have an anesthesia charge as well too. So we use some type of business logic, predictive analytics, a form of artificial intelligence to basically say, hey, this is what we would typically see, is that there or not? So we start kind of putting that intelligence or the business rules layer on top of that. So it flags those things to say, hey, this should be something that should be included in this, or here's something it should not be.
Okay. All right. So what's one of the biggest misconceptions out there when it comes to quality or business performance?
One of the biggest misconceptions is we run into this a lot where hospitals are kind of surprised by, hey, they think, hey, we're really good at this. We got this. We have a really good process. We've got people. We've got an army of 10 people who are doing this, and everything is great, and we're golden, right? And we're not missing any charges. We're not missing any revenue. But when we come in and say, a lot of what people do is kind of a tick and tack method, right? Well, they'll look at one report from a financial side, another report from a clinical side that says, yep, everything is good. Even if you don't take into account human error, that business intelligence we just spoke of doesn't take care of that, right? And automating that and doing something that takes hours into minutes is huge. And just having the system tell you that, hey, here's something that you could have charged for that you didn't, where you're not going to get those missed opportunities as well too. So I would basically say it's the missed opportunity or the challenges is really about people thinking they have it. We apply those tools, run those audits, and then kind of surprised to see how many opportunities there truly are.
So how do you get their attention to want to talk to you if they're saying, hey, we're gold and everything is fine, we don't need your help?
Right. No, that's the biggest challenge. And so this is what usually happens. So our kind of business model is we kind of come in and we do a lot of system conversions where they might be implementing a system or they're moving from one financial system to another. Unfortunately, we'll come in, we'll do our pitch and say, hey, this is the gotchas, this is our tools that can help you. And then they're like, no, we got this, we're good. And then 6 months down or 9 months down the road, they're calling us back and says, okay, hey, this is what we're running into. And then you almost have to let them experience it first before you kind of bring them back in. So it's a little bit of that as well too. So yeah. I don't like to say I told you so, but we get a lot of that.
Yeah. So what are some of the common fears that these hospitals have when they're with these challenges?
Mm-hmm. Some of it is, hospitals are community organizations. They're in a lot of places that we work with. They're the largest employer in those areas. So when we kind of come in and say, hey, there's a more efficient way to do this, we can save you costs, we can save you labor. Some of those challenges are, hey, I've got 5 people that are doing this job, and if I come in and says, hey, we can make this more efficient, and you can reduce those 5 people to 1, or if someone is spending 3 or 4 hours on this and we can get them to do it in less than 30 minutes, in some cases they're like, oh no, I need these resources. What am I going to do with these employees? I can't fire them. One of the things that we try to implement, or based on previous experiences, a lot of times we're not eliminating resources. We're basically reallocating them. You actually have, let's say, a department director, like a radiology director or a lab director, who's spending hours doing some of this work to basically reconcile their charges or reconcile their work. There they can actually then focus on patient care or focus on their processes, and it frees them up rather than worrying about trying to eliminate staff when that's an issue. Then on the other end, you have other hospitals that are way over cost or overbloated, and they do want to reduce costs, and we can kind of help them do that as well.
So how do you get them over the hump if they're afraid that you're going to come in and eliminate jobs? I mean, what do you do to convince them that's not what you're trying to do?
It's tough, right? It's basically, it's almost, you have to prove it out. In some cases, we basically says, all right, we'll come in, we'll do kind of like a proof of concept and show them what the ROI or the value is and how you can actually identify and make some changes. So easier said than done, but it's mostly you just got to like show me, right? So we have to kind of prove it out, or kind of say, hey, this is what we've done for comparable systems, and just show them what we've done in other places. And as we're kind of a young company growing rapidly and trying to kind of build up our library of references and our examples and case studies, so that's helping to make it easier.
Okay. All right, so now let's just focus in on Avelead. So you're young, you're growing fast. What are the perceived obstacles that you see that might be preventing you from achieving the success you're seeking?
Sure. And I think as any with young business, I almost, it goes directly to the main point of your podcast, right? It's quality. We're growing really rapidly. How do we maintain quality as we grow, and how we kind of put some systems in place that, you know, we can deploy and implement our solutions, our services to as many hospitals and health systems as possible without losing quality. So we've got two options. One is we put like a slotting system in place and kind of slow down, and then basically says, all right, we're going to get to you when we get to you. The other option is to kind of ramp up as quickly as possible and get as many people as we want to, so we can get them trained up and go based on to fulfill our bandwidth. But what it's going to be most likely is going to be a little bit of both, right? Is we want to make sure we have a good training process in place for our employees, have a good documentation, a lot of good automation. What we're trying to automate for our customers, let's automate for ourselves, both from a implementation standpoint, from a configuration standpoint, and even our own internal backend, our own billing and invoicing standpoint, our own internal processes, use ourselves as kind of guinea pigs. And so we can scale at a quality level by putting some of these checks and balances in place.
Okay. So could you share a story of how you helped a hospital to overcome their obstacles and fears of automation without having, you don't have to identify who they are, but can you
Sure.
sort?
Sure. Yeah, we actually were working with a 8 hospital system, or we this year as well too. One of their challenges was they're going through system conversion, and they had a challenge of, hey, I need to do this charge reconciliation every day. So like the lab director, the radiology director, nursing directors have to do this, checking everything that they're doing from a clinical side, and then everything that they're doing from a financial side daily, and then making sure that everything's in sync or in balance. So the challenge for that was that they're not used to doing it well at all. I mean, and they had to basically deal with, one, making sure their people are actually doing it, right? If it's a manual process and they're busy, they're taking care of patients, they're taking care of their departments. So that was number one, was just enforcing and making sure that you're doing it. Number two was making sure they're doing it accurately, or as much as possible. And when you're busy, that's kind of hard to do. So with this client, we kind of came in and basically kind of says, hey, here's your kind of key problems, or here's your key issues that you're dealing with, and with the fundamental challenging of implementing it. They're implementing a new revenue cycle system and a new clinical system in the first place. So it's a brand new system. They have to learn different things. They have all these disparate charging departments, or just charging systems, and they all charge differently, right? So for a radiology exam, it's easy. We're going to perform an exam. We're going to do a procedure. For surgery, it could be by 15-minute or 30-minute incrents. For lab, it's different things. So everybody charges differently as well too. So how do you kind of reconcile that? Then in addition, you've got, mischarges that leads to like revenue leakage or human error, or if you don't document something properly or on the clinical side, then it won't show up on the charging side. So there's training as we're learning a new system. So all these challenges kind of led us to an opportunity. So our solution to that was kind of one of our latest new products that we launched at the end of last year, and kind of beginning of this year, is our Rev ID tool, or revenue identification tool, that kind of looks at all that and then automates that process. So we're able to pull everything from the financial system, pull everything from the clinical system, and do kind of like an automated reconciliation. Kind of like if you're used to using Quicken or QuickBooks or those type of things, where you're able to download your transactions from the bank and then basically do that auto reconciliation, and you're focusing just on the discrepancies. It's the exact same thing. But one of the things we found is, this was more from a systematics point of view to make sure, yep, everything's correct, everything's charged properly. But what we found is it actually became more of a tool, not just for the financial side, but also from a quality control side, even on the clinical side, to say, hey, are we performing all the things that we need to clinically, right? So like for that one example, I just mentioned anesthesia, which is kind of an obvious one, but there's so many other different things. So we have clinicians kind of using it as a training opportunity to say, hey, you guys aren't documenting this, or you're not documenting this properly, and vice versa, the impact that has on the financial side. So we're able to identify it from a financial perspective as well too. then the other part, right, is just time saving. Something that was you weren't doing very efficiently, you were doing manually, it's taking anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day. Now you're able to do it in 30 minutes or an hour max as well too.
Okay. All
So
right. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, the kind of other last key part of that from a results perspective, as I like to say, as a result, was really from a revenue impact. So for this particular client, we actually just got our updated numbers this past week. Since they've been live for about 6 months plus or so across these hospitals, they've identified about $20 million in gross revenue, in addition to just the business process enhancements that they were able to identify and take advantage of as well too. So it's become a win-win in multiple areas.
Sure. So, yeah, and now I'm thinking now as you're talking, part of it is that you want people to write more, record more information. So,
Right.
how do you balance that? Because when everybody you want somebody to record more information, they think that's getting in their way of being able to do their jobs. I got to do this now. I got to step over here and write something down. How do you get beyond that so that you can streamline it so they feel that it is part of what they need to do to help them get the work done?
Yeah, and I think this really helps with the electronic medical records and kind of where the industry is kind of going. If you're familiar with the stimulus package or the meaningful use in healthcare that was kind of passed in the past 5-10 years, there's been a lot of focus on meaningful use, having the proper documentation from an electronic medical perspective. And the purpose of all that is really, at the end of the day, to benefit the patients, right? So if everything is documented and captured properly and electronically, then, when you go to your doctor's office versus a hospital, they have all your clinical information there that's in an easily understandable format, and it has everything that you need so they can provide you better patient care. But to be able to enforce that and to be able to almost kind of maximize the ROI of all these electronic medical record systems that they've put in place, that's where we kind of come in and says, hey, you're doing this we're not trying to enforce rules on top of you to say do anything additional, but here's kind of our standard processes that we want to capture that includes any regulatory items, includes any policies that they might internally have, and which is best practices for the patient. It's to reinforce those rules, not to add anything extra on top of it. So the documentation that you've got to do, the meaningful use information that you've got to capture, it has to be that information and making sure everybody's doing it so it's consistent, so we can then share that information with other care providers, other doctors, other hospitals, other physicians' practices, and then on the back end, making sure the financial is right too. So you kind of get a win-win, right? We're kind of focusing on both sides.
Okay. All right. So when you take this whole story, you just said, and you encapsulate and distill it down, what would be the moral of the story?
The moral of the story for me is kind of twofold. One is if you do things the right way and you're able to kind of enforce that, and the human nature of this is to find shortcuts or do what you can, and life gets in the way, you get busy, you're taking care of a patient, to have something that helps you streamline that, and it's a reminder, or we have all these to-do lists, so we get these notifications popping up on all these apps. So it's basically, let's put the technology to use to make our jobs easier and better, to have those reminders, to make sure we've got a good process flow to help us guide through that. And second is do what's right, and then use technology against it, and then you'll get the results that you need, right? So it's basically, that's when I talk a lot about leadership, technology, and results, and we try to believe it is. So the moral is do your job, do it right, have the tools in place to help it, make it easier for you to get results that you need, not just financially, but also for your patients and even for yourself. So you're enjoying your job, you're helping patients, and you and your hospital and health system is getting paid at the same time as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we talked a bunch of different things here about manual operations and enforcing it. So what are the common pitfalls or mistakes that you need to keep in mind when you're talking to the hospitals so that you can help them avoid it and not keep going down the same path all the time?
Yeah, and that's actually funny you say that, because it's very a difficult challenge, and maybe it kind of speaks to the moral we just talked about, where it's human nature. Because one of the things is, the more you use our tool and you are identifying training issues that people aren't using or having issues with. And then ideally, anything that you're missing, people are getting better at it, their processes are getting better, and you would eventually kind of work yourself out of a job. It's like, okay, we don't need this because we've fixed all the problems that it's identifying. But what we found is it never happens, right? It's either if you don't have someone looking over you, or if you don't have someone kind of nudging you, you either go back into the bad habits, or you kind of go back to things that you keep missing. So you almost kind of need that constant reminder, because if I identify, let's say, and I'll just make this number up, if I identify $1 million a month in missing revenue, they're like, okay, what's the cause of that? Let's go to the root cause and let's fix it. And that's what we're doing. We're fixing those root causes. So that $1 million a month that you're missing ideally should be going down every month. And what we found is that we do that initially, where it kind of dropped, and then it just kind of found a steady state a little bit, that we're consistently finding a certain amount on a regular basis, because of either, I guess, this new employee turnover, or kind of bad habits, or something or another still keeps coming up that you need to do. So it's really kind of fix what we need to fix, but then you still need that little help or nudge along the way on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, well, there's part of what it is that if you don't have somebody doing some objective evaluations on a periodic basis to make certain you are staying on track with that, you'll backslide. You'll get those initial gains, and then if people see, well, it didn't really make any difference, we'll just kind of slowly go back to where we were.
Right. Or I kind of, the New Year's coming up, and I use this example a lot, is everybody's going to go to the gym, everybody's great, and everything's good. We're going to the gym. So it's like if you go to the gym for the first 30 days and you're getting some results and you feel good, but if that tapers off and you stop going to the gym, that's not the gym's fault, it's your fault. So that's what I kind of equate to, is like, you've got our processes, you've got the a process tool that's helping you to do it, but you need it on an ongoing basis. You got to use it every month or every day, so you keep it up.
So have you ever heard of the Westinghouse effect?
I've not, no.
Okay, so Westinghouse makes light bulbs and all kinds of electronic equipment. So what they had done many years ago on the manufacturing floor, they were looking at the production line. They're trying to figure out, how can we improve productivity? So they're sitting up in their office, and they're like, well, let's turn the lights up. So they turned the lights up, made it brighter. Productivity went way up. And then over time, it decayed back down to where they were before.
Right.
So then they're scratching their heads. Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know. Let's turn the lights down. So they made it darker. Productivity went up. And over time, it decayed back down to where it was before. And so now they're really puzzled. Something's. So now somebody had an idea, well, let's finally go talk to somebody out there to figure out what's going on. So they went out and talked to the people, and they said, well, what happened? And they said, well, when you turn the lights up, we thought management started watching us, so we worked harder. And then we realized nothing was being done with it, so we just went back to the way it was before. Then all of a sudden, when you turn the lights down, we figure, they're watching us again, so we'll work harder. And then it just decayed. So that's the thing, is if you don't have something constantly reinforcing it to make it stick,
right.
You'll lose all those gains.
Well, that's very true. Yep. And I think I'm guilty of that as myself. So in a lot of different areas. So we all are. Yep. Yeah. Makes sense.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about now. You mentioned before that you had been with a different company and sold it. So could you spend some time telling us your backstory and how you came up with Avelead?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll kind of start. I've actually, my very first healthcare industry is actually very tough to get into, is what I found. I was actually fortunate that one of my very first, I call my real jobs, was actually working for a hospital in Georgia, up here in North Georgia, and just kind of used that as my kind of mechanism to get into healthcare. Worked in their IT department. Started off just fixing computers, fixing printers. But I kind of come from a business family, and I always knew I wanted to start my own business. So after kind of getting in and learning that business, in about 2000, I started my very first business and focused really just on technology and integration, things that I was familiar with, things that I had learned, and just basically start off as an independent contractor. And then really, sometimes I don't even realize how it happened, and we kind of grew over about 10 years to almost like a 30-person consulting firm, And to me, it was a lot of it was kind of ignorance, or a lot of it was like, oh, you're not supposed to just pick up a phone and call a CEO or a CIO and just ask them for business. Mm-hmm. But we did it, and it worked. So in 2010, we sold that business off, was mostly on consulting and technical services, involved in healthcare conversions. Stayed with them a couple weeks. My brother worked with me at the time as well too. And then 2014, I kind of left and was taking some time off. But again, my brother just was nudging me and pushing me. He's like, hey, there's still a lot of opportunity. We can do this. You got to do this again. So this time, he and I both kind of got together and started off with our relationships. Had a little bit of money, so we put that into the business, and then started all over again in a very similar fashion, but with a gear towards technology and automation. And it was more, we were just selling, says, hey, we can do all this stuff for you that's taking you forever to do. We can automate a lot of those things. And then at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, and then we basically then said, hey, we don't really have to do this as a consulting service. This is tools that we've somewhat kind of built that we can actually sell. So in 2015, 2016 is where we actually started making it look pretty, making it look sexy, and making it more not just a techie guy tool, but something that end users can use. And it's really kind of evolved over time and has really kind of taken off kind of since then. And kind of reiterating our kind of core values of leadership, technology, and results, applying to our team. And we're over about 40 employees now in this new business as well too. So I kind of say this a lot. It took me 10 years to get to 30 plus the first time, and over just 2.5 years to do it the second time.
Okay, so what could you share an experience you had early on in life that still influences how you approach business today?
There's kind of two key events that happened in my life. One, my father had his own business, so every summer I was basically his shadow or his grunt, or even sometimes, and I was like the computer geek, the technology guy. IT, computer stuff was new, so I was helping him. And I would just, as at awe when I would see him, or kind of looking at how he was running his business, working with clients and things like that. So at a very young age, that kind of stuck with me, right? This is something that I can do. This is something that I want to help with, and then how I can kind of apply technology to it. So being an entrepreneur has just kind of been in my family and kind of in my blood. And I think that's kind of ingrained on me from early on. The second was really right when we were starting Avelead. At the end of 2014, I was actually diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and fortunately, everything is clean. I'm good. We had surgery and kind of just back to my yearly checkups. But that experience kind of showed me two things. One was I was really a workaholic, day and night on a lot of different things, and then you just kind of get that perspective, right, when you have a kind of a major life-changing event. But then it also showed me going through from a patient perspective of healthcare, so many doctor's visits, so many different bills, so many different things, and what the anxiety, what a patient deals with. That basically kind of gave me that a lot more perspective on the other side of, hey, everything that I've been doing in healthcare for the past 15 plus years, what impact that truly has on a day-to-day basis on a patient itself. So that basically says, like, all right, how do I, now that I've recovered, how do I kind of do my part in that, and how we can make things easier. So kind of my end of the day vision is like, from my perspective, if I'm a patient, if I get a bill, I can actually read or understand what this bill is, instead of getting 5 different bills one from a radiologist, one from the hospital, one from a physician. Nobody what's going on. Eventually we'll kind of get there, but it was basically a point to be able to look at it that way. So that made ingrained in what I'm doing right now, which are those two events.
Cool, thank you. So I did notice on your LinkedIn profile that you ran the Ironman in Florida. So tell me about that. And has that impacted you with business or perspective?
Oh, very much so. I'm and this is like my brother Badar and I both did that together. Him and a common friend of ours started getting into Ironman triathlons, and I was just busy and health-wise as well too. I was always kind of stressed out. So I was like, all right, I started doing it with them. But one of the things it really kind of was, everything that we do right now is, and the same thing applies to business, was like, and I started doing a lot more races. It's like, hey, let's just put a goal out there. If it's an outrageous goal, I'm going to try to do 140.6 miles. And even when I talk to people about that today, that just seems crazy, right? And it's basically, it's a target, it's a goal. What do I got to do to get there? Took me about a year to train, do races leading up to it, and really a commitment, tracking yourself, measuring yourself. Everything that we are actually doing in our business today is about putting metrics in place, putting goals in place, how we're measuring ourselves and doing that. I think putting that physically in an Ironman race or any kind of race was an emblem of that, or any sports, right? It's like watching the scorecard, right, or watching the scoreboard. So it actually really enforced that on me, and how we kind of metaphor or apply that to our businesses as much as possible.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah, that's good. You get to measure it so you can track your progress to get there, and you're keeping your eye on the end goal and doing what you need to get to that.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, what does success look like for Jawad Shaikh today after you've done 2 successful companies?
Sure. Right now, to me, and then this, so someone else had recently asked me, hey, what advice do you have for kind of upcoming kind of entrepreneurs and things like that? And then I think, to me, and that's what helped me almost define success. One of the biggest things I kind of learned as I went through this was I have a tendency to try to do everything myself because I want it done my way. It's the way to do it. And one of the things I learned is I've got to delegate. Obviously you can't do this with a good team. Fortunately, I have a really good team right now, and trust in them, delegate to them, and basically says, all right, you got this, right? If we're going to put these goals out there, you're going to cover your man. I'm going to play offense. You're going to play defense. And we're going to block, and we're going to tackle and get this together and kind of get it done as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. So what that ends up being is, and work-life balance used to be very negative word to me. I think especially before my cancer, like, what work-life balance? Let's work. I love my work. I really enjoy doing it. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So for success for me is I still love my job. I still love working what I'm doing. It's not work to me. It's a hobby. I love doing it. But balancing out of not taking the stress and not trying to do everything. So success for me is being able to spend quality time with my family and my friends and my colleagues and work together. So it's more of a holistic approach, not just hey, we got to make our numbers, right? So making money is important, and that's important. But if you're making money and you're happy, you're helping others, that's success to me. So my next goal is, if I'm able to put this together, put my story together, and help others, that's what I'm going to measure my success on going forward.
Wonderful. All right. So keeping that in mind now as you move forward, what are your top 3 process or business capability challenges or concerns that you're facing today?
Yep. One is a definition, right? Defining our processes. That's one of the hardest things that I've kind of noticed is, or getting them out of my head or someone's head and then doing them, right? That's probably one is like, hey, let's just be clear on what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, right? Is what and getting those. Then that leads to automation, right? We kind of talk about how we can make them more efficient. So that's kind of number one. Number 2 is clarity on when we talked about goals and metrics, right? I know what my goal is. Numbering goals is easy. It's like, hey, I want to do $20 million worth of sales next year. But what does that mean, right? How do you get there? How do you put those steps on there? I think that's probably kind of number 2 is in there. And then really number 3 is how do you get that message or that vision or that goal to your team and to buy in and basically execute against that.
Yeah, I can understand that quite a bit, and I'm really glad to hear you say, when you say defining processes, it's the how. A lot of times when we say process, they define the what.
Right.
And so there's a million ways to do it. But
yep.
all you're doing is giving me requirements for what you want done. How do you actually do it?
Yep, exactly. And then I'm kind of very bad about, hey, I want you to do this and just do it, and then this is how you want to do it, and then just and I just assume that everybody's got it, right? It's like, no, you almost kind of have to go down there one level deeper and just kind of provide them that direction, provide them that guidance, And then once you do that, then let them do it, right?
Right.
I don't want to, it's kind of, you don't want to macro manage, you don't want to micromanage. You've got to find that right medium.
Right. Yeah. And again, it comes down to you got to, and you say defining is a key word too. You really have to clearly define all the words so everybody's focused in an alignment. Otherwise, you say, go write me a plan, and you're going to have no telling what's going to come back to you.
Yeah, yep. It's words are funny things. They mean different things to different people. So you have to make sure you define them in the exact same way. What does this word mean to you, and make sure everybody has the same definition.
Okay, so let's kind of circle back here now. What's the most important question your customers should be asking when they consider coming to Avelead for your services?
Yep. To me, I think it's probably results, like, or what have you, how have you done this, or what results that are you going to show? Because and I'm kind of, I guess, maybe linking it from almost from a competitive standpoint. There's a lot of market confusion in revenue cycle. Healthcare revenue cycle is a very big thing in a small niche. So, even within revenue cycle, there's kind of a front end where you're dealing with patient registration. There's kind of a middle where you're dealing with charge capture, and then a back end when you're dealing with actual claims and bills going out the door. So whenever we talk to people and we say revenue cycle in healthcare, there's a lot of confusion, or our competitors will come in and say, hey, we do this or we do that. So it's basically getting clarity on what the results are and getting clarity on exactly kind of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Because a lot of people come in and will say, we'll do this and we can do this for you at this cost. But behind the scene, there's 20 people that are kind of coding away and kind of doing that versus true automation.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of leads it to, there's a buzzword going around right now, and you're probably aware of, like RPA, or robotic process automation.
Yeah.
And everybody's about RPA, and I say that's great, but what you really have to do is take it to the next level. And I kind of use the analogies. You can have, if you're in a horse and carriage and you put a robot in driving that horse and carriage, it's still a horse and carriage, right? So you need to make your processes right. You need to make your results right, and then automate that, right? So let's get to a Tesla, and then automate that. Put a robot in that Tesla, not try to automate your horse and carriage as your processes go.
Yeah. Technology's got to balance with what you're trying to do. You can automate all the mundane tasks that you want, but if it's still within that old technology, you're stuck.
Right. Yep.
All right. So it's kind of a similar question. Now, what's the most important thing your customers should consider when evaluating Avelead against the competition for the work?
Yep. Some of it is, I guess, in the same thing. I would actually look at the technology itself. So I think the example that I use with the horse and carriage versus an automated or a Tesla is kind of very similar. Is how are they doing it? Is it truly automated, which is one part's important, and truly are they clear on what they're doing? Because, and I'll give you one example, is when we talk about automated charge reconciliation, what we're talking about is daily charge reconciliation for everything that happened in the previous day and before even a patient bill is dropped out of the door. Because a lot of times you have issues and you find problems when the bill's gone out, it's gone to the insurance company, then you have to do rebilling, recoding, and all that other stuff. Majority of the companies out there that do this today, they'll say, hey, we do automated charge reconciliation, revenue reconciliation, but what they're doing is going back and looking for the past 6 months of stuff that you've processed already, and says, oh, here's stuff that you can go back and rebill for and all that other stuff. So it's kind of a proactive approach versus a reactive approach from our clients. So that's probably one of the things that we would point out.
Okay. All right. So I guess what you're kind of keying off what you said too, that's why as a patient, then you start getting bills 9 months, 10 months later for something that, it was a long time ago. I don't even remember anything.
Exactly. Yep. And there's a lot more higher scrutiny for it. There's less likely for them to even pay, and there's more likely for an insurance claim to deny. So if you catch all that stuff up front, it has a huge impact on the hospital's cash flow.
All right. So now you've taken two startups to grow them into companies. So if you had to start all over again, if you want to think about Avelead, if you wanted to start that all over again from scratch, what would you do differently today than you did 5 years ago, and what would you keep the same?
So one of the things I would do, keep the same, is really kind of keeping that startup mentality. I kind of feel like sometimes if you do well, and we did the same thing when we restarted Avelead, is if you get a lot of money or if you get investors, your approach is to spend a lot of money on development, on everything. Really stay as a bootstrap type company, right? Don't overspend. You don't need lab spaces. It's like kind of going back to the garage type mentality. We started in our home offices before we moved here with Avelead. I would keep that the same. Keep that small startup, scrounge for every penny. So that just ingrains good habits, all right? And as you kind of go forward, what I would do differently is do distribution of work, and I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. Is I would not try to do everything myself, right? I try to do that a lot. Define those processes that we talked about, even internally, and then turn those over your team as quickly as possible, and then just guide them and direct them based off your experiences, based off of what you know, and help them really take it to the next level. And I think that'll help you kind of accelerate growth as much as possible.
Okay. All right, great. So, Jawad, we could just keep talking, but we're rapidly running out of time, and I want to honor your time so we don't overspend it. So, you're a fantastic storyteller. I really enjoyed your stories and about the LTR, leadership, technology, and results. So I'm certain our viewers will find this just as fascinating. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Business Performance Podcast with your business coach, Henry Schneider. For more episodes and business strategies, please visit welcome.ppqc.net/blog. That's www.welcome.ppqc.net/blog. And remember to subscribe so you can get the latest episodes. Thank you.